He had paid $1 for the deed at a county auction, and he put the key in the lock on a Tuesday in April with the full expectation of empty land. He turned the key. He pushed. From the inside, the door swung open. She was large, nearly his height, which he had not anticipated from any door in Montana, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who had spent several weeks dreading a thing and had finally reached the other side of the dread. She held the door and stepped back. "I've been expecting you," she said. "I suppose you'd better come in." Before this story goes any further, if you've ever had to open a door and face what was on the other side of it, subscribe to this channel and stay with me through every word. Drop the name of your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Because the man standing in that doorway doesn't know yet what he walked into. He thinks he bought empty land for $1. What he actually bought, without knowing it, was one of the bravest things anyone in that valley had done, and the girl who had been doing it alone for 8 months. His name was Cade Orrin, and he had been coming down from the mountains for 3 years without quite arriving anywhere. Not because he lacked direction. He had survived 10 years as a wilderness guide and fur trapper in the northern ranges of Montana, and a man who did that for a decade did not lose his direction. He had lost his will to keep moving, which was something different and harder to locate the source of. He was 44 years old, and had slept under enough open sky that he had run out of things to prove to it. What he wanted, if he was going to use a word like wanted, was somewhere to stop. The Gallatin County Delinquent Tax Auction had offered 47 properties in the February session. He sat in the back of the room and let the hammer fall on 46 of them. The Alcott place was last. 240 acres 12 miles outside Bear Creek Ridge, road washed out in 2 places. A cabin and outbuildings, allegedly abandoned, 3 years of back taxes owed. He raised his hand when the auctioneer cleared his throat and called $1 to close the books. Nobody else raised theirs. What the auction house did not know, because no one had ridden out to verify in over a year, was that the property was not abandoned. Her name was Wren Alcott, and she had been alone on her father's ranch for 8 months. Levi Alcott had died of fever in July, in the second week of the worst summer heat in 11 years, without a will and with 3 years of back taxes unpaid. Wren had nursed him. She had buried him under the cottonwood by the east fence. She had stayed after, because there was nowhere else to go, and because someone had to keep the animals alive, and because leaving felt like burying him twice. She had known about the taxes. She had not known about the auction. She had been sick herself in September. The notices posted in Bear Creek Ridge while she was too weak to ride the 14 miles to town, and by the time she recovered, the hammer had already fallen. A surveyor passing through in January had mentioned, in the general way of passing conversation, that he'd heard the Alcott place had sold. 6 weeks after that, in early February, she had confirmed it. She had spent those 6 weeks doing what she had been doing since July. The animals, the fence line, the root cellar, the firewood. She was not a small woman. She had her father's height and her father's build, and had been doing heavy work alongside him since she was 12. And she moved through the ranch with the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing everything alone long enough that there was no longer any wasted motion in her. She was 20 years old, and she ran 240 acres the way her father had run them, with intention and without complaint. In Bear Creek Ridge, the last time she had ridden to town before she started rationing her trips, 3 women outside the general store had watched her load supplies into the wagon with the long, measuring look she had been living inside since childhood. The look that started at the top and traveled down slowly, calculating, as though she were a thing to be assessed rather than a person to be spoken to. She had finished loading, checked the harness, climbed up, and driven home. She had learned a long time ago that other people's opinions of her size were theirs to manage, not hers. That had been 14 months ago. She had not gone back. She heard Cade's horse on the road from a quarter-mile off. In 8 months of being the only person on 240 acres, she had learned to hear everything. She let the fire go out. She went to the door and waited. He was bigger than she'd expected. Men who bought abandoned land at dollar auctions had a particular shape in her imagination. Smaller, perhaps, or more official-looking, or dressed like someone who worked in a county office. He was none of these things. He filled the doorway the way the mountain filled the horizon, simply there, as though the question of it had never been open. He looked at her without speaking, which she had also not anticipated. Men who came to take things usually announced themselves immediately. "You have the deed," she said. "I have it. Then I expect you'd like to see what you bought." She stepped back and let him in. The cabin was small and plain, and everything in it had a purpose and a place. Her father's system, which she had maintained with the precision he had taught her. The stove was clean. The shelves were as stocked as 8 months of her own labor could make them, which was not entirely well, but was better than nothing. The dog, Old Birch, was in his corner by the stove. He opened one eye at the stranger, considered him, and closed it again. Cade Orrin looked around the cabin the way a man looked at a space he was trying to understand. He looked at the firewood stacked inside the door, at the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beam, at the record book on the shelf, a thick cloth-covered ledger worn soft at the corners, at the dog, who had opened his eye again and was watching. "You've been here the whole time," he said. 8 months. Alone, yes. He set his coat on the peg by the door, her father's peg, which had been empty since July, and sat down in her father's chair, the only chair. She watched him consider it, decide, and sit, and the sequence of those 3 things told her something about him that she filed away. "I've got nowhere to send you," he said. "And I expect you've got nowhere to go." "That's right on both counts," she said. "Then we'll need to figure something out." He looked at the stove. "Is there coffee?" There was. She put it on. They sat across the small table from each other, the mountain man with his dollar deed and the girl who had been living on the land it described. And neither spoke much, because there was a great deal to figure out, and neither of them was the sort to begin figuring before they'd finished thinking. Old Birch moved from his corner to a point equidistant between them and lay down with his chin on his paws. "I'll sleep in the barn," Cade said finally. "There's a mule in the barn," Wren said. "He doesn't like strangers." "Neither do I," Cade said. She kept what might have been a smile to herself and showed him where the lantern was. He told himself he was staying to understand what he'd bought. This was partly true. 240 acres required walking before it could be understood, and he walked it over the first several days. The creek that came down from the north ridge, the south pasture that had been properly rested, the east fence that had been restrung along the bottom quarter within the last year. Someone had done good work here. He found the evidence of it in every corner of the property, and understood, yard by yard, that the word abandoned had been inaccurate in every possible direction. He did not mention this. He simply walked and noted. The mule, whose name appeared to be nothing, but who answered to a low sound Wren made when she came into the barn, gave Cade 2 days of flat-eared suspicion, before deciding on the 3rd morning to accept a piece of dried apple from his hand. Old Birch, who according to Wren had never in his 8 years acknowledged a stranger willingly, trotted over to Cade's side of the property on the 4th day and sat there for no reason either of them could identify. Wren watched this from the fence line. She did not say anything about it, but she noted it the same way he noted the fence. On the 6th day, she put the last good piece of cured venison in the pot, with dried juniper and salt and the remaining onions from the root cellar, and let it go on the back of the stove for morning. She did this because she had been saving the piece for a moment that felt like it deserved it, and she had decided, without quite stating it to herself, that this was that moment. The smell of it moved through the cabin and out into the yard before noon, something deep and woodsy and warm. The smell of food that had been given actual time, which was not something she had bothered with much in 8 months of cooking for one. Cade was in the barn when it reached him. He went still for a moment in the middle of re-hanging the barn door, which she had mentioned once, in passing, needed attention, and which he had addressed without announcement, and then he finished the hinge and came in for the midday meal. She set the bowl in front of him and sat across with her own. He looked at it. He picked up his spoon. He ate for a while without speaking, which was how he did most things, and she had learned enough of him in 6 days to read the difference between his regular silence and the silence that meant something was occurring to him. This was the second kind. He finished the bowl and sat. He did not say it was good. He got up without a word, filled the bowl again, and sat back down. She understood this to be the highest praise available from this particular man, and she accepted it as such. 3 weeks in, a neighbor named Cole Pratt rode over from the property 4 miles east. He'd heard the Alcott land had sold and wanted to see who'd come in. He was not unfriendly. He shook Cade's hand, looked over the fence line Cade had restrung, and nodded at the general improvement of things. Then he looked at Wren with a particular variety of measuring look that came with a new piece of information: large young woman, large mountain man, remote ranch, no one else for miles, and his expression did the calculation before he could stop it. Wren held his gaze until he looked away. She did not explain herself. She did not adjust her posture or her expression. She simply waited, with the patience of someone who had been doing this for a long time, until the look ran out of room and the man on horseback said his goodbyes and rode back toward his own fence line. Cade watched this from the barn doorway. He did not say anything about it, but the next morning he was up before she was, and when she came out the barn door had been fully rehung and was swinging clean on new iron hinges, and the 6 months of scraping against the ground it had been doing were over. On the 14th day, she was cleaning her father's workbench in the back of the barn when she found his hunting knife behind a loose board she'd never noticed. The good knife, the one she'd thought was lost in July, the one he'd carried since before she was born. She stood with it in her hands for a moment. Then she went outside and walked to the east fence and stood with her back against the cottonwood post for a while. Not a long while. 8 minutes. Then she went back. She came in to find coffee on the stove, still hot. Cade was outside. He didn't mention it. She poured herself a cup and did not mention it either, and they existed in the particular silence of 2 people who understood each other without having established the terms of the understanding. On the 15th day, she took the record book off the shelf and set it on the table. "You should know what this land is," she said, "if you're going to live on it." He sat across from her, and she went through it. 8 years of her father's notes in careful columns, the water table measurements and the pasture rotation and the winter severity indexes and the yield records and the observations about the soil on the north slope that drained too slowly and the fix her father had been planning and had not gotten to. She spoke for 45 minutes. Cade listened without interruption, which was its own form of attention. Afterward, he sat looking at the book for a moment. Then he looked at her. Not the way he'd been looking at her, as someone who was present and required accommodation, but with the specific focus of someone who had just understood something and was choosing to know it. She had seen that look before. Her father had given it to the land. One evening in the 3rd week, she was in the barn talking to the old horse, Clover. the way she sometimes did when there was no one else, not expecting response, but needing the movement of her own voice in the air. She was explaining to Clover that she did not entirely know what to do with a man who fixed things without being asked and listened like he was reading something. Papa would have said he was the right kind, she said to Clover. Quietly, Papa would have said you could tell by what a man noticed. She forked hay for a moment. I think he's going to stay, she said. I think I'm all right with that. On the other side of the partition, in the half-dark of the barn, Cade Orrin sat with a bridle he was repairing and did not move. Edgar Alcott arrived on a Wednesday. Wren knew who he was. She had met her father's younger brother exactly twice, at intervals of years, and remembered him chiefly as someone who spoke about Levi rather than to him. He had a lawyer from Bozeman with him, a thin, deliberate man who introduced himself as Mr. Fenn, and they arrived in a hired buggy that was not built for the road. Edgar expressed with practiced concern how worried he had been since hearing about Wren's situation. He used the word situation 4 times. He looked at Cade once, with the assessment of a man who found what he was looking at useful, and then looked at Wren. He laid out 2 things. First, the $1 auction notice had been posted at the county clerk's office and the Bear Creek Ridge post office. But Edgar believed, his lawyer had advised him, that proper notice for a delinquent tax sale required additional publication, and that the sale might be challenged. Second, Wren was a young unmarried woman living alone on a remote property with an unrelated man, and Edgar, as her nearest male relative, was prepared to assume her proper guardianship and bring her to Bozeman, where she could be properly situated. He did not ask what she thought about Bozeman. Cade stood by the fence during this conversation and said nothing. He watched Edgar with the quality of attention he brought to things that required assessment before response. After Edgar and Mr. Fenn returned to their buggy and started down the road, Cade came back to where Wren was standing. He doesn't care about you, Cade said. I know, she said. Cole Pratt told someone in town. Word traveled. I know that too. She looked at the road where the buggy had gone. She had the particular stillness of someone holding something heavy by will rather than ease. He'll file something at the county seat, she said. Yes, the notice question is weak. I was sick when the notices were posted. I couldn't have done anything even if I'd seen them. The sale was properly noticed, Cade said. I have documentation. That won't hold up. He paused. The guardianship is the real play. I'm 20 years old, she said. I know. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her work through it, the calculations she had always done alone, the carrying of weight without showing the strain of it. Something in him did not want to watch her do that alone anymore. Do you trust me? He said. She looked at him. The question was not small. Yes, she said. Then let me help. She looked at him steadily. I don't need. I know, he said. That's not what I said. She was quiet for a long time. A long time for her was 18 seconds. All right, she said. That night she went to the barn and sat in the hay for 8 minutes and let the weight of it sit on her chest without trying to lift it. 8 months alone, and her father's knife in the workbench, and Edgar Alcott in a hired buggy, and a man she'd known for 3 weeks who looked at her the way her father had looked at things worth understanding. 8 minutes. Then she went back. The county clerk's office in Gallatin City held 31 people on a Friday morning in May, which was more than it was meant to hold. Wren counted them when she walked in, the way she counted things, precisely, without comment. She sat in the chair placed for her with Cade on one side and the space for her own argument on the other. Edgar Alcott was across the room with Mr. Fenn. She did not look at him. Mr. Fenn laid out the case in 2 parts. First, The notice question. He had identified a procedural irregularity in the posting schedule that, he argued, rendered the $1 sale technically invalid, returning the property to the county, at which point the question of Levi Alcott's estate and its disposition became properly open. Second, the matter of a young woman's situation. Wren Alcott was unmarried, without a father's protection, and the nature of her current arrangement raised questions that her uncle, as nearest male relative, had both the legal standing and the moral obligation to address. The clerk looked at Cade. Cade stood. He said, "The notice was posted at the county clerk's office on the 14th of November and at the Bear Creek Ridge post office on the 15th. I have receipts for both." The procedural requirement was met. He set the receipts on the desk. The sale was valid. He let that settle for a moment. Then he said, "I want to tell this court something about the property it's being asked to consider." He looked at the record book in his hands. He had brought it from the shelf that morning without explaining why, and she had let him. 8 years of records, he said. Water table, pasture rotation, soil notes, yield, weather. The last 8 months of entries are in a different hand. Smaller, neater. He set the book on the desk beside the receipts. She kept this ranch alive through a Montana winter by herself. At 20 years old, with 4 hens and a mule and a dog, and whatever she could grow and hunt. I came in April, and the cellar was half stocked, and the fence line was holding, and the animals were sound. He paused. This court is being asked to decide whether that woman needs a guardian. She does not. She needs the world to stop underestimating what she is. He looked at Edgar directly. A man who shows up 7 months after his brother's death to claim concern for the brother's daughter is not concerned about the daughter. Edgar's lawyer said the court would still need to rule on the guardianship question as a matter of law. The clerk looked at the receipts. He looked at the record book. He looked at Wren for a moment, and she looked back at him without adjustment. The sale was properly noticed, the clerk said. The deed is valid. As to guardianship, the statute applies to minors and to adults deemed incapable of self-direction. Nothing before this court suggests the latter condition applies. He closed his ledger. The property stands with Mr. Oren. Miss Alcott's situation is her own to manage. Edgar left without looking at Wren, which she had expected, and which confirmed everything Cade had said about the nature of his interest. Outside the courthouse, in the May noon light, she stood beside Cade on the steps and said nothing for a moment because there was a great deal of it, and it needed a moment to settle. He reached into his coat. He took out the deed, the one he'd bought for $1 in February, with his name on it and the property description in the county clerk's dry language, and he held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. "Best dollar I ever spent," he said. "Get the clerk to add your name." She took the deed. She read it through once, the way she read everything, carefully and completely. Then she went back inside, and he waited on the steps, and she came out 7 minutes later with her name beside his on the paper. Wren Alcott, Cade Oren. 240 acres in the Bear Creek Ridge District, May 1881. She held it for a moment. She looked at the mountains. "What did you actually expect," she said, "when you bid on this place?" He thought about it, which was the thing she had come to respect most about him. He didn't answer before he'd considered the question. "Somewhere to stop moving," he said. She folded the deed and put it in her coat pocket, and they walked to where the horses were tied. They rode back in the late afternoon light, with the valley going gold around them, and the creek audible before it was visible, and the smell of May coming off the ridge. Old Birch was on the porch when they arrived. He looked at both of them with the same gravity he brought to most things, and then thumped his tail once, which was the most enthusiasm Wren had seen from him in 8 months of acquaintance. She put the kettle on. He sat in the chair. She asked, "And did you? Stop moving?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. The record book was on the shelf where he'd left it that morning. He got up and took it down and opened it to the last page with writing. March 29, her entry, a week before he'd arrived. 4 hen, mule sound. Cellar half full. No visitors. He read it in the careful way he read things, which was the same way he looked at land, with the attention of someone who intended to know it. He picked up the pencil. In his own hand, the large economical script of a man who wrote only what needed writing. He put a date and 3 words at the bottom of the page. May 14th, 1881. First good spring. He handed her the book. She read it. She set it on the table between them. "First good spring," she said. "Yes," he said. Outside, the Bear Creek Ridge Valley was doing what it did in May, coming green at the margins. The creek running full from the snowmelt, the mountains still white at the crown but softening toward what they would be by June. The cabin was warm. The coffee was ready. Old Birch came in from the porch and took up his position between them, which was where he had taken to sleeping. Wren Alcott had kept her father's ranch alive in the cold and the dark and the alone, not because she knew anyone was coming, but because some things were worth keeping whether anyone was watching or not. She had opened the door the morning a mountain man came with $1 worth of paper because she had decided to stop hiding. She had not expected what came through the door when she opened it. She had not expected to be seen the way her father had seen the land, with the attention of someone who intended to know it and did not intend to leave. In the end, being found and stopping hiding turned out to be the same thing. She had done both herself.